You open a dashboard before you open your eyes. 640 beds, 11 properties, 4 campuses, and a single screen tells you which ones are empty. Not units. Beds. You stopped thinking in houses years ago. Somewhere in that grid, a leasing coordinator you've never personally hired is closing a fall pre-lease 3 states away, and you find out about it as a number moving from red to green. That's the end state. $500 million in student housing assets, and you're not a landlord anymore. You are a platform. Capital moves through you. Enrollment data moves through you. You decide which campus gets the next 100 beds and which one gets nothing, and you make that call from a spreadsheet, not a walkthrough. Now picture the other image. One room, one futon you bought used. One kid down the hall who hasn't paid August rent and won't answer his phone, and his mother's number is the only leverage you have. That's where this actually starts, not the dashboard. The room. Every operator running 600 beds today ran one room first. The gap between that room and that dashboard isn't luck, and it isn't a lump of money that drops in your lap. It's levels. Each one has its own math, its own financing, its own ceiling, and each one ends the same way, with you hitting a wall that the previous level's tools can't get you past. You don't skip from a rented room to a REIT partnership. You climb. And climbing means understanding a business most people get wrong on the first try because they price it like a normal rental and find out the hard way that it isn't one. So forget the dashboard for now. Forget the 600 beds. This is level 1, and it starts with a single house near the gates of a campus you don't even go to anymore. Level 1 is a single house, 4 blocks from the gates, and the first thing you learn is that you're not renting it the way you thought you would. You could lease it the normal way, one lease, one tenant, one signature, a group of 5 friends signs together, and if one of them stops paying or drops out mid-semester, the other 4 are on the hook for his share, or you are. That's how a regular landlord thinks. It's also how a regular landlord loses money on a house full of 20-year-olds. So you don't do that, you lease by the bed. 5 bedrooms, 5 separate leases. Each roommate signs for their own room and a shared claim on the kitchen, the living room, the yard. Each one is responsible for their own rent and nobody else's. If the kid in bedroom 3 stops paying, bedrooms 1, 2, 4, and 5 keep paying exactly what they always owed. You haven't lost the house. You've lost 1/5 of it for one semester, and you already know how to fill it. Here's the part that actually makes this work. None of these 5 students has a credit history. None of them has 2 years of pay stubs. None of them, on paper, is a bankable tenant. A normal landlord runs a credit check and stops there, which is exactly why a normal landlord won't touch a house full of 19-year-olds. You don't run a credit check, you run a guarantor. Every lease gets a parent's signature next to the student's. The parent is legally on the hook for that bed's rent if the kid doesn't pay. Full liability, not a favor, not a formality. That single co-signature is what turns 5 unbankable teenagers into 5 leases you can actually underwrite, because behind every one of them is an adult with a job, a credit score, and a bank account you can chase if it comes to that. Per bed leasing to students only works at scale because of this. Without the guarantor, you're just hoping. With it, you have a contract with teeth. Now the math. A family renting that same 5-bedroom house pays you, say $2,800 a month, because that's what a 5-bedroom house rents for as a single unit in that market. Rent it by the bed instead at $750 a room, and 5 students are paying you $3,750 for the exact same walls. Same mortgage, same taxes, same roof. Almost $1,000 more a month because you priced the rooms instead of the house. That gap is the entire business model of student housing in one sentence. You're not selling square footage, you're selling beds, one at a time, to people who'll pay a premium for their own lease and their own lock on the door, backed by parents who'll pay if they don't. One house running like this throws off real cash. Enough that you start looking at the house 2 doors down, then the one across the street. And that's exactly where level 1 stops being simple. You bought this house with your own down payment. You signed your own name on the mortgage. Your own credit, your own capital, your own signature, that's what got you here. And it's also the wall. A bank will only extend so much to one person with one income and one balance sheet. You can stretch to a second house if you're careful. A third one, on your own money and your own signature alone, isn't happening. Whatever comes next needs someone else's capital, or it doesn't come at all. Level 2 is where the block adds up. Not one house anymore, 5 or 6, plus a small multiplex or two, all within walking distance of the same gates, because walking distance is the only distance that matters to a 19-year-old without a car. The money for this stops coming out of your own pocket. You take a HELOC against the first house, which has been cash flowing clean for 2 years and has equity sitting in it doing nothing. You pair that with a private lender, someone local, someone who's watched your per bed numbers and likes what a fully leased 5-bedroom throws off compared to a normal rental. Between the two, you're buying property using other people's money against your own track record, not your own paycheck. That's the actual unlock at this level. Capital stopped being the limit the day you had a house with equity in it and a rent roll that proved the model. But money buying you more houses also means the business stops being simple. At one house, you could hold the whole leasing calendar in your head. At 6, you can't wing it anymore. You have to run it like a business with a real calendar, because student housing doesn't move the way normal rentals move. A normal rental turns over when it turns over. Someone gives 60 days notice in March, someone else in September, and you never have more than 1 or 2 units empty at once. Student housing doesn't work like that. Close to the entire portfolio turns over in the same 8 weeks, every single August, because that's when the school year resets and this year's seniors graduate out while next year's students move in. If you wait until August to start filling August's beds, you've already lost the semester. So you stop reacting and start pre-leasing. By January, sometimes as early as December, you're marketing next fall's beds to students who haven't even finished this year yet, showing houses to sophomores who want next year's lease locked before their friend group scatters and someone else grabs the good rooms. Get ahead of it, and you walk into August at 90% full before the moving trucks show up. Fall behind, and you're still discounting empty beds into October. And then summer hits, and you meet the problem nobody warns you about before they own their first student house. Most tenants leave for 3 or 4 months. Some houses sit fully empty. Some you fill at half rent with summer session students or interns who don't need a full year lease. Either way, that's a real recurring gap, months of the year where beds that generate $3,000 a month generate a few hundred, or nothing, while the mortgage on all 6 houses keeps coming due like clockwork. A standard year-round rental never does this to you. Student housing does it every single year, on a schedule you can set your watch to, and if you didn't budget for it, summer is when you find out. You survive the calendar. You survive the summer gap once you know it's coming. What you don't survive cleanly is the workload. 6 houses means 6 sets of showings, 6 leasing cycles, 6 move-in inspections, 6 move-out damage walkthroughs every May, and 6 lists of guarantors to chase down every time a payment doesn't land on the first. You're the one posting listings. You're the one showing up when a pipe bursts at 11 at night. You're the one calling a parent in another state because their kid's rent is 9 days late. Capital isn't the ceiling anymore. You are. There are only so many hours in a week, and you've filled every one of them being the business instead of running it. Level 3 is where you stop buying houses. 6 scattered properties, 6 leasing cycles, 6 sets of guarantors. You've felt the ceiling of that model, and the fix isn't a 7th house. It's one property built for exactly what you've been doing by hand. A purpose-built student property, or an old apartment block gutted and converted into one, dozens of beds under a single roof, individually leased by the room the same way your first house was, but with the scale to justify something you couldn't afford at one house, staff who live on the payroll, not in your head. No single operator's savings account covers this. A ground-up build or a full gut renovation runs into real money fast, and none of it comes from a HELOC this time. It comes from outside investors, a small syndicate of people who've watched your numbers for years and want in, or a handful of equity partners writing real checks, stacked with a construction loan or a bridge loan that gets the building finished and stabilized before it converts to permanent debt. You're not the only signature on this deal anymore. You're the operator who found it, structured it, and now has to make it perform for people who put money in expecting a return. That changes what your week looks like. You hire a property manager to run the building day to day, and a leasing coordinator whose entire job is managing the pre-leasing calendar you use to run yourself out of a spreadsheet. For the first time, the business doesn't need you standing in a doorway showing a room. It needs you managing the people who do. What you actually own now is a rent roll, dozens of individual per-bed leases, each with its guarantor, all reset on the same academic calendar, all tied to one number that used to be background noise and is now the only number that matters: enrollment at this one school. Zoom out, and the demand side of this business is real, but it isn't a straight line up. Nationally, College enrollment climbed to roughly 19.4 million students in fall 2025, about a 1% increase and the strongest year since 2018. But that number hides a split. Public four-year schools grew close to 1.2%. Private colleges actually shrank, down around 1.4%. Enrollment isn't rising everywhere. It's rising at some schools and slipping at others, and which side of that line your campus sits on is now the single input your entire property depends on. There's a longer shadow behind that split too, and it's worth sitting with instead of waving off. The number of American high school graduates is projected to start declining after 2025, a shift people in higher ed have been calling the demographic cliff for years, and it's still debated how sharp it gets or how fast. It doesn't hit every school the same way, but it's a real contested headwind sitting under this entire strategy, and pretending otherwise is how operators get surprised 5 years into a 30-year loan. Which is the actual constraint of Level 3. One purpose-built property tied to one campus means your income rises and falls with that one school's fortunes, full stop. A dip in enrollment shows up directly in your leasing numbers. A competing property breaking ground half a mile away splits the same pool of students 2 ways instead of 1. A single bad leasing season, a slow pre-lease, a bad winter, a rival property undercutting you on rent, hits this asset with nothing behind it to absorb the blow. You built something bigger than a house. You also built something with exactly 1 point of failure. Level 4 is the answer to the single campus problem, and the answer is simple to say and expensive to execute. You stop building one property at one school and start building the same property at several. But you don't pick the next campus the way you picked the first one, because you liked the town, or you went to school nearby, or a broker called you with a deal. You pick it with data. You're looking for schools with enrollment that's growing or at least holding flat, not schools riding the wrong side of that public versus private split you learned to watch back at Level 3. You want a documented shortfall, a waitlist for on-campus housing, a dorm system that's been full for years, a local market where the existing off-campus supply hasn't kept pace with the incoming class. Enrollment data and a housing shortfall together are the whole thesis. One without the other is a guess. Financing changes shape again at this level too. A construction loan and a syndicate of equity partners got one building built. Getting 3 or 4 built at 3 or 4 different schools at the same time needs a different kind of capital, institutional debt. Banks and insurance companies will lend against a portfolio of stabilized, per-bed lease properties in a way they'd never lend against a single unproven asset, because a portfolio of 4 90% occupied buildings across 4 campuses is a far safer bet than one building at one school. You're not negotiating one-off deals with a private lender anymore. You're underwriting a portfolio, and the portfolio itself becomes the collateral. Day to day, you also stop being the person who manages the property manager. You bring in a third-party management company, a firm that already runs leasing, maintenance, and staffing across student housing at scale, and they run each site so you don't have to build a local team from scratch every time you enter a new market. Here's what this actually buys you. The single campus exposure from Level 3 is gone. One school has a rough year, a dip in its incoming class, a new competitor property that undercuts you on rent, a slow pre-leasing season, and it barely moves your numbers, because 3 other campuses are having an ordinary year at the same time. You've built a portfolio that can absorb a bad year at any one site instead of living or dying by it. That was the entire point of getting bigger. What replaces it is a different kind of overload. You're no longer managing tenants, or even managing a property manager. You're managing a management company at each of several sites, and you're the one reading their reports instead of walking their halls. You're underwriting new campuses on a spreadsheet full of enrollment figures and shortfall data, trying to tell a genuinely undersupplied market from a mediocre one before you commit tens of millions of dollars to it. You're on calls with investors who want quarterly numbers, portfolio-level occupancy, and a clear answer on where the next site is. Every one of those jobs takes real hours, and there are more good deals coming across your desk than you can personally evaluate with any rigor. That's the wall at Level 4. It isn't capital anymore. You've proven the model can pull an institutional debt. It isn't labor in the old sense either. You're not the one fixing pipes or chasing guarantors. It's your own attention. You are the bottleneck on every underwriting decision and every site's leasing performance, and there's exactly one of you. Level 5 is where you stop being the capital and become the operator of someone else's capital instead. At roughly $500 million in student housing assets, you're not out shopping for a bank loan or courting a syndicate of 10 equity partners anymore. An institutional capital partner steps in, a fund, a REIT-style vehicle, or a pension-backed allocator looking for exactly the kind of steady, contracted income a stabilized student housing portfolio throws off, and they bring the bulk of the equity and the debt. You bring the operating company, the underwriting judgment, the site selection, the relationships with the management firms running each property, the whole machine you spent 4 levels building. They fund it. You run it. This isn't a hypothetical shape for the top of this business. It's exactly the direction the real student housing market has actually moved. The largest, most valuable student housing companies in the country haven't stayed independent. They've consolidated into institutional hands. The clearest example is Blackstone's acquisition of American Campus Communities in 2022, the largest student housing REIT in the country at the time, in a deal valued at roughly $12.8 to $13 billion. That's not your deal, and nobody's suggesting it will be. But it's the real proof that institutional capital doesn't just dabble at the top of this market, it dominates it because at scale, student housing behaves like the kind of contracted, predictable income stream institutional money actively hunts for. Your rent roll at this point isn't houses, and it isn't even single properties anymore. It's thousands of beds spread across dozens of campuses, each one still running on that same per-bed lease with a parent guarantor behind it that you learned in a 5-bedroom house years ago. The mechanism never changed. Only the number of times it's repeated changed. Your actual job has changed completely, though. You're not underwriting a single site anymore. You're allocating capital across an entire portfolio, deciding which markets get more beds and which ones you quietly exit. You're reading enrollment trends the way a hedge fund reads earnings, watching which campuses are gaining students and which are exposed to that same demographic cliff that was a distant worry back at level 3. Current occupancy across student housing nationally has reportedly run around 95% for the current school year, which tells you demand is outrunning new supply in a lot of university markets right now, and new development has slowed to match. That's a real tailwind and also a snapshot of one cycle, not a permanent guarantee. Markets that are tight today can loosen fast if enough capital chases the same opportunity you just found. And here's the thing, nobody's operating company ever gets to skip, no matter how many zeros are on the portfolio. The calendar doesn't care how big you are. Fall move-in still happens in one 8-week window. Pre-leasing for next August still has to start the previous winter at every single site, or occupancy slips everywhere at once. Summer still empties out thousands of beds instead of a dozen, and every one of them still needs a plan: short-term summer session leases, conference housing, staggered lease terms that stretch a portion of the portfolio's income into the off-season instead of losing it outright. You didn't outgrow the academic year mechanic that ran your very first house. You industrialized it, pre-leasing systems instead of a spreadsheet, off-season programming instead of a discount flyer, staggered terms instead of one lease date for every bed. Same problem, 5 levels later, just solved at a scale you couldn't have imagined the summer you rekeyed that first lock yourself. Picture 2 mornings. In the first one, it's 7 a.m., and you're standing on a porch 4 blocks from campus holding a screwdriver because the lock on bedroom 3 needs rekeying before a new tenant moves in at 9. Your phone is in your other hand, and you're calling a parent in another state for the second time this week because her son is 11 days late on a bed that costs $750 a month, and you need that guarantor signature to mean something today, not eventually. You'll show 2 more rooms before lunch. You'll answer a maintenance call before dinner. This is the whole job. You are the business. In the second one, it's also 7 a.m., but you're at a different kind of desk, looking at a different kind of screen. Occupancy is at 94% across the portfolio and climbing toward the fall. Pre-leasing numbers are up at 3 campuses and soft at a 4th, and that soft number is the one you're actually thinking about. Is it a bad leasing season, or is it the first sign that campus is exposed to the enrollment slide you've been watching for years? By 9, you're on a call about a 5th campus, one with a documented housing shortfall and a growing incoming class, deciding whether it's the next place your capital partner's money goes. Nobody's calling you about a lock today. Here's what doesn't change between those 2 mornings, the mechanism. A bed, individually leased, a guarantor standing behind the rent. A calendar bolted to the academic year, with a summer gap built into it that never goes away no matter how large the portfolio gets. Level 1 and Level 5 run on the exact same physics. The only thing that's different is which layer of the business you're standing on, fixing the lock yourself, or deciding which campus gets the next 100 locks. Same ladder, different rung. Most people who try this skip the part that actually matters and go straight to the fantasy, the dashboard, the 500 million, the fund partner writing the check, without ever learning what a guarantor actually protects them from, or that August isn't just move-in month, it's the only month, or that summer is going to take a real bite out of their income every single year, whether they plan for it or not. Underwrite student housing like a normal 12-month rental, skip the guarantors, miss the pre-leasing window by even one season, and you won't find out you were wrong at signing. You'll find out in October, staring at empty beds and a mortgage payment that doesn't care that nobody's moved in yet. And by then the semester and the money is already gone. That's the mistake this whole video was really about. The link's in the description to the book that walks through all of this properly, level by level, lease by lease, so you find out before October, not after.